And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
Help! I need somebody. Help! Not just anybody.
Yeah, that's about it. Help. We need somebody, and we have the guys here to help. The Law Show on CL 650. Today, we're focusing on immigration law. And in the studio, we have Gordon Maynard to my right and Alex Stojicevic. Welcome to the show. You are two of the partners. The third isn't here from MKS Law in Yaletown in Vancouver, right?
That's correct.
And you have a great website. You must have jumped on the website train early to get vancouverlaw.ca.
Yes, that's 2001.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you get that website? But it's really easy.
December 2001, yeah.
So vancouverlaw.ca is very easy to remember. So if you can't remember MKS, vancouverlaw.ca is the way to go. Now, it is a new year, and talking about the internet, we were talking just before the show about how people who want to, after the holidays, get rid of their family. But there's a lot of Canadians that don't have their family around, and they would like to be reunited with parents and other family members. So that's where a law firm like yours really comes into play here. So there's been a lot of changes with what we call the family reunification system in Canada. That's where somebody comes into the country and is able to get resident status here in Canada, and then would like to bring their parents in. So what has changed? Alex, maybe you can answer this. What has changed in the last year, and how has it affected people wanting to be in touch with their family?
Well, back in the 80s and 90s, a very large component of Canadian immigration was family class.
Mm-hmm.
And a big chunk of that was sponsoring your parents and grandparents. Since the middle of this decade, and certainly since November of 2011, it has been very, very difficult to do that. Quotas have been imposed. Under the government that was in place before the Conservative government, under the Liberals, under Martin and Chrétien, backlogs were allowed to be created. They would handle numbers basically just by processing, X amount or Y amount of applicants. As part of an overall levels decision, we'll do, X amount of applications in this type of application and Y amount over here. So a backlog was created. The Conservative government, when they came into power, found that to be somewhat dishonest and decided to be overt about how they were going to handle it. And they just said, we're not taking any for 2 years.
Right.
And
when was that?
That was between the 2011 and 2013.
Okay.
And the reason they gave is, we want to deal with some of the mess the Liberals left with a backlog.
Right.
And then they took the position that we'll reopen the program to 5,000 applicants.
Which isn't very many.
It's not very many, really. 5,000 applicants, if you think of principal applicants, means somewhere in the neighborhood of 9,000 to 11,000 people, because they look at one of the two parents as a principal applicant.
Okay, so you double it up.
You either double it up, or sometimes there's a dependent child if it's, if it's a second relationship, or if the father or the mother are 57 or 58 and they still maybe have a dependent child from us, with them. So it's more than just 5,000 people. And what's been happening in the last 3 years is this 5,000 gets filled very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And
I want to get into the headline story that's happening, and people are getting couriers to. So Gordon, maybe you can explain this. They open up the window to allow this X number of people to apply, and it happens on a day. Like we were talking about, I joked about vancouverlaw.ca. You sit on the computer and you enter in, I want to apply for that website domain, which is pretty straightforward and easy to do. But when it comes to bringing family members into the country, it's not as easy as sitting down in front of a computer. How do people get into the country now? How complicated is it?
Well, and you're talking about sponsorship of parents. The applications need to be filed. They've picked a day of the year in early January, and they say, we open it now.
Why would they do it in January when it's cold? I mean, people are queuing up, right? Is this what I'm hearing? That people are lining up outside the building waiting to get in?
Well, a lot of annual numbers are set by immigration. I think by the end of the year, they've got a pretty good handle on how their numbers went over the course of the year, and so they try and project ahead and start the new line right there. And so they picked a day. It's early January, and they also have a quota on the number of applications. So the only way you have to get into the lineup is to complete your application and submit it on that day and get it accepted. And unfortunately, they have a centralized processing system.
Where is that?
Well, for family class applications, it's in Mississauga, Ontario.
Oh.
And it's a dedicated office.
Well, that does nothing for me if you have a family member in India or China wanting to come in here
Well,
in
the
the Lower
applications
Mainland.
are put in by
Right.
the sponsor in Canada.
Right.
So you gather your documents from the family members, you gather your sponsor documents, and they're put together in a package and submitted to that centralized processing office.
But so how do you or a family member get it to Mississauga?
Well, I mean,
Courier.
in the first year, there was definitely an advantage to getting in by courier. We didn't know how quickly 5,000 would be filled, and the phenomenon that occurred was there were probably 7,000 or 8,000 applications that arrived in the first week, and then sometime in January they announced, sorry, we've had too many, and they mailed back the ones that they weren't going to process. Last year, they filled in 5,000 spots on day one.
Right. But there's stories in the news of people paying couriers
Yes.
to line up.
We paid couriers.
We
You pay courier.
did this as well. I mean, we're no
But
different.
isn't that discriminatory against people who don't live in the Toronto area? You've got to pay somebody now. You can't line up on your own.
Of course it's discriminatory.
Of course
but
it
they,
is.
they've put in a system where there's a centralized receiving place.
Mhm.
They have a quota, and they make the quota work by first in, first served.
Mhm.
You're bound to have this problem. It's built into the system.
Yeah,
And
you can't avoid it.
You can't blame people for hiring couriers to try and get their
Yeah.
application in. That's the system they put into place.
I mean, I'll give you an example. We know a law firm in Edmonton that used Purelator, and they had Purelator go out on the 31st to get things there for the 4th. A plane was missed over the New Year's long weekend,
Yeah.
and not one of their applications made it in.
Wow.
And so now you have a problem. You have angry clients who've paid money to have these applications completed, who paid processing fees, which are not insubstantial, for their parents to be processed. They paid a courier. It's not like they mailed this and hoped. They also paid a courier, and all for nothing.
so it's a bad system.
It's a bad system.
Yeah. So, what do you do as specialty lawyers? You've got a boutique firm downtown. So, when someone comes into you and says, I have a family member in China or India, wherever they are in the world, and I'm here in Canada, I have status in Canada, whether I'm either a citizen or you have a resident status here, what do you say to them?
Well, Zach, look, there's no magic. We have to, if they've come in and they're serious about this, why do they want to sponsor their parents?
Mhm.
You know, we're not in the same world that we were in 20 years ago. There are not even in China and India and places that we thought of as developing are not the same demographically. There aren't 11 children somewhere to take care of mom and dad.
Mhm.
There's one or two.
Right.
And if one or two has moved to Canada, then that responsibility has passed. Even if the demographics have changed, people's feeling of responsibility and often these things are cultural and hasn't. And they have to deal with, okay, mom's elderly, she can't be on her own anymore, I have to bring her here. And part of the reason why I immigrated 10 years ago to Canada was because Canada allowed this.
And you could get a job that would support that.
And you could get a job, that's a slightly different issue, but I mean, at the end of the day, you have to do something with these parents. And if you now are faced with a situation where, okay, there's 5,000 tickets, I need to be able to get into that one. So what's going to happen? Already you have a certain level of income that has been raised. The government has raised the criteria for your minimum income levels. So that's the first thing that's happened. The second thing that happens is you want to make sure that you get everything correct, which means a lot of people are going to lawyers and consultants with these applications. And then the third thing is you want to be able to ensure that you're on there on the first possible day.
Now, what is the Gordon? I'll get you to move your mic away a little bit. There you go. Yeah, it's rubbing against your
Sorry.
your beard. What's the big mistake that people make if they try to do it on their own, where you can help them? What's the number one thing that you see someone tries to fill out the paperwork on their own? What are the pitfalls?
Making sure that the application is complete
Right.
is first and foremost, and that's not just complete in terms of the supporting documents, but complete in terms of the information that you've put down on the form. You want to be accurate, everything needs to be supported. So just being complete and accurate is number one service.
So if you fill out the form and it's not complete, and you get the courier to submit it, and there's something missing, it's null and void.
That's it.
Pretty
So
much.
they don't say, okay, you're in the system. Let's tweak this a little bit.
And this is one of
Varies.
the challenges. You know, you've moved to a system now where instead of full-time employees that are permanent officers of the immigration system, which is now under the new Liberal government called the Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Program,
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to Citizenship and Immigration Canada, which they used to be called.
You can call it what you want. It's still the same.
Still the same.
Yeah.
You know, the program has over the last decade gone to automation and has brought in contract employees, summer students, people with short amounts of training, and there's no discretion. All they do is they either look at it and see if everything's complete, and if it is, they continue it on for processing. If it's not, no common sense, no discretion, no anything, they just ship it back. And you've now lost your place for a year.
For a year. So there's nothing like, oh, well, can you just send this and this and this, and when we're okay? They just say no thanks.
And the other thing, Zach, that's very important, the value that we add, is that we look at what the issues facing the applicants are. Now, maybe you meet the financial criteria, but maybe your father had a job 15 years ago for a company that might make him inadmissible today because that company is a state company in Iran or a state company in China that's going to get extra scrutiny. Or before they go for their medical exam 2 or 3 years into this process, let's talk now about your parents' health. Do they have a condition that could make this an impossibility, right? So the value we add often is alerting them to these issues before they've spent the money on something that will ultimately be.
You kind of vet their application before you go through it. Now, what is the number to qualify to bring somebody in? How much do you have to make?
Well, it depends on the size of family you have, and this is a controversial issue because it was imposed by the Conservatives. So before 2011, you had to meet something called a low-income cutoff, and this depended on the city that you lived in Canada, how large that urban area was, and the number of children that you had. That then changed over time, and I'll let Gordon address the minimum necessary income change that happened in 2011.
Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Why don't we just, we'll think about that for a second. And Gordon, I know you've been crunching numbers and adding things up there with regards to this. I'm not sure where you're. I'm going to ask you about that in just a moment. Yeah. I just want to let people know you're listening to The Law Show on CL 650. We have Gordon Maynard, Alex Stojicevic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver. Just one quick thing before we go to break. You obviously have people on staff that can speak the language of people, or you have access to helping communication. That makes a kind of obvious question, right? Mm-hmm.
Sure. I mean, in our office, we are lucky that we have 3 now fluent Spanish speakers, 3 Mandarin speakers, fluent Japanese speaker, 2 Serbo-Croatian speakers, including myself. We also cover German. Our partner Rudy speaks German, as does one of our assistants. So we have a lot of languages covered.
And you can pull people in if you need be, right? Yeah. Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.